Why are you being such a public nuisance?
I think we're not being a public nuisance. In the UK, government is being a public nuisance by spending £1.5 billion of taxpayer money on subsidies for the meat and dairy industry. That's an industry that is ultimately killing the planet and killing billions of animals. In the meantime, it's spending £150 million, that's 10% of that, on planting trees and similarly on alternative proteins. It goes to show the government's priorities in terms of propping up unsustainable and unprofitable industries over what's ultimately better for the public and the planet.
And Nathan, let me turn to you. I'm clearly somebody who you would need to convince, for example, to turn to veganism. I'm a meat eater. I love meat. So it's people like me, surely, that you need to be convincing of your cause. How do you do that? Because I'm not sure being what some might say is a public nuisance is going to achieve that.
All right, so essentially, I just want to address that we're actually a movement that is geared towards system change, not individual change. We are demanding that our governments and larger corporations make a stand and use their power and resources to make the change to a just and sustainable plant-based food system. That is the only way we are going to have a sustainable future on this planet that is just for humans, for the planet, and for animals. So essentially what we're demanding is a system change and that our government invests in plant-based alternatives rather than the obscene amount of money it spends on animal agriculture subsidies in order to provide plant-based alternatives.
That's an authoritarian approach, though, isn't it? Instead of trying to convince individuals to change their ways, you want government to dictate to them what they can and can't eat.
So essentially, we are demanding that our government makes this change because of the irrefutable scientific evidence that shows animal agriculture is responsible for around a quarter of greenhouse gas emissions. It's the leading cause of deforestation in the Amazon. And it is proven again, irrefutably, that by transition to a just and sustainable plant-based food system, we will be securing the future on this planet for humans, animals, and the environment.
And James, coming back to you, I mean, what are your plans for the rest of the day? How long are you going to stay up there? How long are you going to stay up there? I mean, is it till the demands are met? Because if it is, I think you might be waiting a long time.
Yeah, well, I know we've been waiting for a change on climate change in the UK for decades now, and it's still not coming fast enough. So we're prepared to stay here. We've actually got some hammocks, and I think we're planning on getting comfortable until either our demands are met or we at least have a meaningful conversation with someone from DEFRA. We can discuss how they're going to transition their subsidies away from these destructive industries to something a bit more sustainable, a bit more fair. Ultimately, our only solution going forward, which is plant-based alternatives over meat and dairy. So basically, we'll see. As long as it takes, is the answer to that, for sure.
Isn't there a certain irony that if you lived in the kind of country that you want to create, which appears, as we've already established there, to be very authoritarian and quite dictatorial, they would have just cut you down by now, wouldn't they?
By no means. I definitely don't want to live in an authoritarian regime. I just want...
Because you want the government to get involved. You want the government to tell us what we can and can't eat. That's a dictatorship.
Well, the government's already doing that. It's giving £1.5 billion of subsidies to make animal foods unfairly cheap, unfairly convenient, and still more destructive. So we're saying, why don't we remove those? Essentially, it's propping up an industry that's meant to die. So why are we doing that? If you believe in taxpayers' money being spent on things that don't ruin the planet and are just completely unnecessary, why don't we move away from that? £1.5 billion of totally unnecessary spending.
And Nathan, final word to you. How far are your organisation willing to go? Could we see protests on the roads, for example, like Insulate Britain?
Well, first of all, Insulate Britain are a completely distinct group from us. They have their means and goals, and we have ours. We are strictly a non-violent direct action group. We will remain peaceful, but if that means taking direct action, then so be it. And we are willing to carry on going. We are very motivated, and we will carry on going until we see this transition to a just and sustainable plant-based food system.
Well, James and Nathan, thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you for your time.
Yes.